This month on 219 West, an explosive public reaction to decisions made in secret. Is it time to reform the grand jury process?
It's become anachronistic. Prosecutors do not need grand juries to gain indictments.
Connecting the disconnected. How the homeless are using technology to cope with everyday life.
The internet and social media does give me a place in society. It helps me to be amongst people.
For most New Yorkers, getting around is easy. But for those with disabilities, many of the city's offerings remain just out of reach.
That elevator's not working. That's the building's elevator, it's not ours.
Welcome to 219 West. I'm Ben Brody.
And I'm Sophie Gauthier. We begin the new year with an issue that exploded at the end of last year: grand juries.
Juries in New York and Missouri decided not to indict white policemen involved in the deaths of 2 black men. In the outcry that followed, the grand jury process itself was called into question. Gabriella Ionetta has the story.
The end of 2014 left many in disbelief when the grand jury decided not to indict the police officers involved in the killings of Eric Garner and Michael Brown.
As an American, my sensibilities were assaulted by both of those non-indictments.
Media personality and professor Karen Hunter hosts a radio show on Sirius XM Urban View that focuses on African American issues in the United States. Hunter explains the frustrations for not only her audience, but people protesting across the country.
Because we're not even talking about convictions here. We're talking about, can we get a trial for this man whose life was taken in for what? At the worst, selling loose cigarettes on the street? Which he wasn't. He was actually breaking up a fight. So should he be dead today? No? Okay, well, let's have a trial to figure out who's responsible. And we couldn't even get to that point. So, I mean, I don't know, the level of frustration, I think that's what you see in the street.
We asked legal professor Stephen Zeidman at the CUNY School of Law what shocked him the most about the 2 verdicts.
That there was no indictment on any charge. You know, there's a full range of charges, from intentional murder to manslaughter to what they call negligent homicide. So where it just gets, if you will, easier for a prosecutor to make out a case. And you have to understand as well, and I don't think a lot of people fully appreciate this, what you're asking a grand jury to do. You're not saying convict beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the trial standard. It's a much lower standard. You're just saying, if you're the prosecutor, was there reasonable cause to believe that a crime was committed by this person?
So what goes into the grand jury process? In New York State, when a case is taken to the grand jury, the district attorney meets with witnesses and police officers to collect evidence. A grand jury is made up of 23 people with no judge present. The prosecutor calls on witnesses to provide testimony that supports an indictment. Once the presentation is complete, the jurors vote for one of 3 decisions. A, indictment, meaning a felony was committed and the case should go to trial. B, non-indictment, meaning there was no crime. Or C, the jury may direct the prosecutors to file for an offense lesser than a felony.
As a young African-American man, I can relate to the frustration being felt on the streets of Ferguson and streets across our country.
Many have voiced issues with the level of secrecy of grand juries. There are other options when a felony is committed, such as a preliminary trial, which is presented in front of a judge and is public. Chris Hermes from the Grand Jury Resistance Project says it's time to do away with grand juries altogether.
It's become anachronistic. Prosecutors do not need grand juries to gain indictments or to charge people. There is a formal charging process that most prosecutors can use, which is the complaint process, and use a preliminary hearing to put on evidence to show the court that this person is worthy of being tried. That system works perfectly fine.
While Zeidman agrees that preliminary hearings are the way to go moving forward, he admits there's ultimately a trade-off.
I think preliminary hearings, I think they make perfect sense for everybody. The only argument against a preliminary hearing, really, other than the prosecutor saying, I want to retain control, is just efficiency, that it takes more time and it costs more money.
Others, such as former Assistant DA Hassan Ahmad, have highlighted the unique bond between the police and prosecutors. Ahmad suggests cases against police officers be tried by special prosecutors.
I think that the police and the district attorneys, they work together all the time. There's a very close-knit relationship between them. So I do think there's a value of any situation where you have a close-knit type of situation where you have an independent prosecutor assigned. It happens all the time if the district attorney feels that there is some kind of a conflict. They don't normally do so when it's a police officer, but maybe they should.
Ahmad is not alone. According to Zeidman, indictments on police officers are extremely rare, which might contribute to the growing sentiment that independent prosecutors should be used in cases against police officers.
No prosecutor should ever be allowed to sit on a case where there's police brutality, or in the cases of Eric Garner and Michael Brown, actual killings.
What you're seeing across the country is more and more movements for special prosecutors. So as opposed to the local prosecutor, that's number one.
As long as you're going to continue the grand jury system, I think a special or independent prosecutor is crucial to having a fair look at the evidence and being able to actually indict when there is probable cause to indict.
For 219 West, I'm Gabriella Ainetta.
Smartphones, tablets, and computers, gear you wouldn't normally associate with the homeless. But with free Wi-Fi and the decreasing cost of technology, the homeless now have easier access to life online. I spent time with one of them.
This says be happy, be who you want to be. If others don't like it, then let them be.
This is James Christian, reading one of his daily tweets. With his tablet in his hand, he looks like any other internet user. But at 37, James has been living on the streets for more than 10 years. James is active on several social media platforms. He uses Instagram, taking pictures of places where homeless people can get free meals, like this Jewish community house.
When I upload, I give the address and I give the times of when to eat.
James used to access social media from Apple stores across the city.
In every Apple store, there's always 2 or 3 homeless people using their display computers.
But 5 months ago, James received his own tablet from a homeless advocate. James is not the only homeless person receiving technology. In 2011, Will Wang launched Underhand in New York. The concept helped 4 homeless people by giving them prepaid phones and Twitter accounts to share their daily life.
But what I did realize is that online, it's through social media, anyone is willing to talk to anybody. Any, people they know, or even strangers. So I figured if the homeless had a way to also have social media, would people be more likely to talk to them?
The experience was life-changing.
So Carlos, he always wanted to start his own business, so he decided he was really fluent with Twitter after 2 to 3 weeks, so he decided to reach out to people in the world, say, hey, can someone help me design a logo? He got that. Hey, can someone help me make a website? He got that. Hey, I really need a laptop to really get this business going. Someone donated a laptop, and he got off his feet just through those 3 things.
This is also an opportunity James hopes to have.
But it's very challenging to earn a living. You have to work a lot of hours, especially if you're unschooled, if you haven't been through college, and I haven't. I believe I could be self-employed using the social network. I'm hoping that it'll change my life in greater ways in the future.
With free Wi-Fi areas being developed throughout the city, James' goal of building his social network is becoming a reality. Last year, a study conducted by the University of Southern California found that 75% of homeless youth use social media.
For both homeless adults and homeless youth, cell phones and social media are both critical resources that they're using to stay healthy, get the support that they need.
At this internet cafe in Koreatown, James has sought refuge from the bad weather outside. Since he left his parents' place at 21, he has been dealing with loneliness on the streets. This morning, seeing people respond to his tweet helps him.
There's a lady called Maggie. This tweet right here,
she messages, take care and stay in many warm places as you get a chance to, sending warm thoughts to you. And that's very nice. I get messages like that on a consistent basis.
And perhaps this social interaction is the most important help for James.
The internet and social media does give me a place in society. It helps me to be amongst people, in a unique way, that I might not get out here. So yeah, I do feel, like I'm together with other people.
For 219 West, I'm Sophie Gauthier.
New Yorkers love to say the whole city is just within reach. Skyscrapers, parks, world-class art, and even the ocean are all a subway ride away. But for 900,000 New Yorkers with disabilities, the city's transportation system leaves much of the city just out of reach.
I'm Simi Linton. I bill myself as a writer, a filmmaker, activist, and New Yorker. There are constraints. The transportation system certainly impedes my flow, my ease, my getting around, my being part of the city and part of the vital things that happen.
Simi Linton has used a wheelchair since she was 23 years old. To get around New York, she has to use buses. It often takes her 45 minutes to make a trip that might take 10 on the subway or in a taxi. In 2011, Linton sued the city to make taxis more accessible to people with disabilities. Why? Largely because of what many wheelchair users and other disabled New Yorkers say, that transportation in New York City is so inaccessible that it is illegal and immoral. Here's the state of transportation accessibility for the nearly 1 million New Yorkers with disabilities. About 2% of cabs can accommodate wheelchair users, although that number will go up to 50% by the year 2020, thanks to Linton and her co-plaintiffs. Buses are almost 100% accessible, and of the 468 or so subway stations, 82 are accessible. That means they use elevators, ramps, and other adaptations. They're mostly in Manhattan. There's also Access-a-Ride, a paratransit option that is open only to people with disabilities. Many criticize it as unreliable and inflexible because of delays and the requirement that users book in advance. Much of this system exists thanks to Jim Weissman, who sued the city for transportation accessibility in 1979. He has won most of the major concessions from the city that are in place today. He says that when he sued, disabled people often, quote, couldn't get off the block.
There was no accessible buses, there was no paratransit, there was no Access-a-Ride, and there were no curb ramps. One guy I know named Francis Perry used to let his wheelchair go down the subway steps, boom, 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 crash, bang, boom. He'd clear out, tell everybody, look out, let it go down. Then he'd go down on his behind like you did the stairs when you were 2 years old and couldn't walk stairs. And get up, get in his chair, pull himself into his chair and take the subway.
Weissman's lawsuit took 5 years to resolve. But eventually, then-Governor Mario Cuomo helped broker a deal. 100 major subway stations would become accessible. A percentage of the money for future station renovations would be put aside for accessibility. Buses would become entirely accessible, and the Access-a-Ride system would begin. Most people with physical limits rely on the bus. Still, some disabled people do use the subway. Edith Prentice is one of them. She's a Washington Heights resident who has used a wheelchair since 1992, and she leads multiple advocacy groups for disabled people. She and I plan to meet above ground at Rockefeller Center one Sunday. We were heading to the nearby subway station, which services the B, D, F, and M lines, so she could show me how she uses the system. But when we planned to meet, the elevator was being repaired. We had to meet in the station instead.
Elevators being out is a very constant problem, so you have to know your alternate route.
She told me about a number of difficulties, from out-of-service elevators and the lack of accessible transportation, to gaps between the subway and platform that make it hard for her wheelchair to get on the train. I asked her why she bothered and why it was important to her that subways be accessible.
Just like anyone else, you wake up in the morning, you go, I feel like going to Macy's today. If I couldn't get into the subway, if I had to take the M4 to go to Macy's, I'm not bothering. The reason for accessible taxis is so that I don't have to wheel to 220th Street in the middle of the night when I am having an asthma attack because there's no bus running.
We traveled from Rockefeller Center over to the station at Lexington Avenue and 53rd Street. There, we encountered an elevator that smelled like urine as we headed to another track for a transfer.
Late one night, it was probably New Year's morning, and the elevator was out, and there was a sign, and it said I had to go back to 42nd Street to get out. Okay, so I went back to 42nd Street, but the problem was I couldn't get out through 42nd Street because the entry to the Port Authority was locked. So I spent the night hanging out on the mezzanine of the 42nd and 8th Avenue station with a book and a bottle of water. You gotta carry a book and a bottle of water. If you could carry a potty, it would be really good too, but you do the best you can.
We waited 18 minutes for a 6 train to Grand Central, where Prentice could more easily get home. When the train arrived, we were prepared to board, but it was too full to accommodate a wheelchair. It left without us, and we decided to exit and take a bus instead. We moved toward the street, but we were blocked by another out-of-service elevator that was maintained by the building over the station.
Hi, how do I get out in a wheelchair?
The elevator, you want to go upstairs?
I want to go to the street.
That elevator's not working. That's the building's elevator, not ours.
So let's figure out what we can do.
In the cold December air, Prentice decided we should head back down and take an E train to the A.
Some days are longer than others.
From there, Prentice took the E train to 34th Street and grabbed an A train north toward her home. To Linton, this kind of trip is just one of the many ways that disabled New Yorkers don't have full access to the city.
Why do I have to go in the back door of places? Why do I have to go in the elevator where the garbage is taken up to get somewhere? You know, my local polling place has only recently become fully accessible to me in terms of not just getting in the door, but the voting booths themselves. Until I think 2 years ago, I had to get someone to come in the voting booth with me because the levers are too high.
To many, including Weissman, who sued the city, this is a simple failure of city authorities to follow laws regarding non-discrimination of those with disabilities. These include the New York State Human Rights Law and the federal Americans with Disabilities Act, which was enacted in 1989.
If you substitute other minority groups, right, black people can't use the bus, it would be insane. Nobody would even consider it.
Historically, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which oversees trains and buses, hasn't argued that accessibility isn't desirable, but the organization has said putting elevators in its decades-old stations would be both difficult and costly. Both the Taxi and Limousine Commission and the MTA responded to this report. The MTA listed a number of commitments it has fulfilled or was working on, including $561 million it has put aside for accessibility in its next capital plan. The TLC said it aimed to expand transportation and that it was, quote, exceedingly grateful to have worked closely and successfully with the disability community to create a plan that truly addresses the needs of all passengers, including those with disabilities. Ultimately, Linton said she feels optimistic on alternate Tuesdays.
The thing that would make me more optimistic is if young people growing up were really in integrated environments, and so disability was an ordinary part of life and part of the community, and therefore provision for and accommodation for that variation, that human variation, was seen in was second nature.
For 219 West, I'm Ben Brody.
For many people, Chinatown is a tourist destination. For others, it's home. At the Museum of Chinese in America, a new exhibit explores the identity and history of one of New York's most vibrant neighborhoods. Brian Urbzaitis has the story.
And in a Chinese wedding, you change clothes a few times. And my Aunt Juliana had the most dazzling cheap house with matching jewelry and shoes and bags. And I'll just never forget.
How does immigration shape identity? Every neighborhood in New York yields a rich tale of artistic and cultural history. Waves of Identity, on view at the Museum of Chinese in America, invites visitors to explore a rich collection of Chinese American history. Through art, objects, and stories, we consider what it means to be Chinese American.
For each sort of turning point in American history, there is a Chinese American story. For example, the Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War, there is a Chinese American narrative within that sort of mainstream understanding of American history, and that's often missing.
35 years ago, the New York Chinatown History Project, now known as the Museum of Chinese in America, began collecting and archiving history of New York Chinatown. In its early days, the History Project captured oral histories of laundry workers, salvaged archives of Chinatown businesses, and commissioned photographers to document Chinatown. The collection has grown to include over 65,000 artifacts from more than 500 donors, featuring over 350 oral history interviews and a Chinese American history library.
That's something that has always been the strength of MoCA, really activating sort of the daily life and everyday objects that people don't really pay attention to, but all of them have a lot of history and a lot of stories.
Walking through the museum, identity becomes the main theme of the show. Where does America begin and Chinatown end?
It's really, responding to that enduring question of what does it mean to be Chinese in America. Even within the Chinese American community, it's a pretty diverse community. And so with different perspectives and different historical contexts, and we really try to bring those diverse voices together.
People would always approach me like, what are you? What's your background? It would be, my response has always been, I'm Chinese and I'm Jamaican. When you're a kid and you're growing up, kids are kids and they see differences and they call them out, right? So you start to get confronted with your own identity pretty early.
American pop cultural artifacts pepper the displays. Among them, books by Chinese American authors, tributes to 9/11, and Chinese chicken McNuggets. But fluency with American pop culture does not necessarily guarantee a smooth transition to being an American. Experiences of prejudice also line the gallery walls.
And I didn't realize the racism against Asian American men and Asian men in this society until I was trying to get jobs. I had a long period of unemployment, and I called up the guy who had helped get me my first job. Should I quit being a reporter? I've been unemployed for nearly a year now. And he said, no, you're a good reporter. They're not hiring you because you're an Asian male.
Waves of Identity is on exhibit through March 1st, 2015 at the Museum of Chinese in America. A visit to Chinatown might be just the ticket for an experience that's truly American. For 219 West, this is Brian Urbsidis reporting from Chinatown.
Lions, kangaroos, penguins, whales. All creatures that have provided inspiration throughout literary history. But how about rats? Where do they fit? Here's Alden Nusser with some of his personal musings about rats.
I hate rats as much as the average New Yorker, except for some reason I think I'm a little bit fascinated by how disgusting they are. So whenever rats make the news, my ears perk up. In the last 2 months, 2 council members have held press conferences claiming that the population is out of control. But then last week, a scientist from Columbia University released a report speculating that New York's rat population is way below previous estimates. So I decided to find out more about how many rats there were and why New Yorkers like me seem to care so much about them.
Yeah, my name is Michael. I'm the owner-operator of the Rat Patrol New York, Inc., Brooklyn. I hate them so much. Listen, God created everything for a purpose. He created me to kill them. They picked them up.
Michael spent the next hour blowing my mind with war stories and flabbergasting me with his dead rat porn.
I mean, look at this guy right here. You want to touch this one? This actually looks like it's a beaver. It's a rat.
Even though Michael couldn't give me an exact number for the rat population, he provided me with an amazing amount of info about his arch nemesis.
These things have been around since the dinosaurs. They can hold their breath underwater for 2 minutes because they're very communal animals. They groom each other. They're filthy animals. They're responsible for the bubonic plague. 1347 to 1352, 25 million Europeans died. And I've heard horror stories of rats in the neighborhood eating the milk off babies' lips. So I despise these things, you know what I mean? And they're so filthy anyway, you know?
After talking to Michael, I was like, I should unpack the deep meaning behind rat hate, so I went where most New Yorkers go when they have some type of issue, a shrink.
Okay, yeah. I'm Christian Churchill. I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist. The Freudian would want to pay attention to the possibility that there are important, likely sexual links to the symbol. It's not the rat per se that's the issue, it seems to me. It's the fear that's getting put onto the rat. What we'd really be after is figuring out what's getting, in a way you could say, getting pushed outward onto this other thing. And then they can respond to it, you could say maybe in a safer way. Because who actually likes rats? Very few people.
Dr. Churchill had a point, so I set out to find some rat lovers.
My name is Raquel Cintron. I'm the organizer of the New York City Rat Meetup Group.
Well, they each have a very particular smell. Max smells like toasted almonds, and Fluffic here smells like French pastry. Rats are not dirty, filthy animals. That's a misconception about rats. They are very loving and caring. If you give it a chance and actually just touch a rat, you'll see that they interact with you, and they like to communicate. Well, the best way to communicate is like if they're twitching, you just go. I will always have rats in my life.
I began to wonder if I too might always have rats in my life, and I wasn't that into that. Plus, I extrapolated from what Dr. Churchill said that getting rid of rats might extinguish my own perversions. So I decided to go back to the exterminator community and see if rat genocide was an option. Luckily, there was a convention coming up.
My name's Andy Linares. I'm standing in the middle of the 2014 New York Pest Expo. This is the biggest and most significant one-day event in pest management in the United States.
The Pest Expo is basically a trade show where a wide-ranging rainbow coalition of exterminators convened to get educated, talk shop, and get demonstrations and then drool over new rat-killing technology.
If you were a rodent at this point, you would definitely be under control.
I was having a great time at the expo, but I was really there to find one person, the event's keynote speaker and a living legend when it comes to New York City rats. If anybody was to be trusted, it was this guy, and I was lucky enough to catch him on his way out.
My name is Dr. Bobby Corrigan. I'm an urban rodentologist. That means I focus my studies on just the rodents of our cities. You know, in New York in particular, we do have a unique relationship with the rats. The rats have been in New York City for over 250 years. There is no way we know the actual number of rats in New York City, and there's no scientific way to be accurate in knowing a number of rats in New York City.
So I guess that's that as far as the population is concerned. But what about the future of rats and New Yorkers? And what about me and my neuroses? Would we ever be free of one another? Who was going to have the last laugh?
You know, I think it's a constant coexistence, and I'm not sure there's going to be a last laugh.
That's this month's edition of True 19 West. I'm Sophie Gauthier.
And I'm Ben Brody. Tune in next time for more stories from the 5 boroughs and beyond.